So which one of these latency graphs do you think shows frame generation? I'll wait. If you guess the one on the top, well, think again. I think we can all agree that Borderlands 4 is far from an optimized game, and it has some problems. And at the same time, there's a grip of misinformation floating around online, where people who have systems better than mine are showing worse FPS with similar graphic settings. So, considering that didn't match my experience in the game, I figured we would run through some options here and maybe dispel some myths. The way this is going to work is I'm going to show you several different presets, and we're going to go from there. Monitoring software on screen on the top right is Intel's PresentMon. I'll leave a link for that in the description. As well as the settings that you're going to see in-game, I am running some custom INI tweaks. I'll leave a link to that mod from Nexus Mods in the description, as well as some of my personal tweaks to that mod. And before any of you decide to say anything about like, rah, engine INI tweaks don't work in the game, blah, 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 try it. I'll wait. Go turn off volumetric fog, and if you did everything correctly, well, the evidence will be in front of your eyes. Starting things off here with our baseline test. We have windowed full screen in 1440p. I do not have in-game frame limits or VSync on because I have that set to a driver level. For all of these tests, I am capping my FPS at 141 since I'm on a 144 Hertz struggle bus monitor. VSync, G-Sync, and Reflex and Boost are all enabled in the NVIDIA Profile Inspector. I have my field of view turned up higher than the default here because, well, 90 feels a bit claustrophobic. This actually will produce a slightly lower FPS than you would see otherwise. However, we can still make it work quite handily. Moving on over to advanced. Right now we're running DLSS, but at native resolution, just basically getting us DLAA. FrameGen is currently off for the test. You can ignore how it says just on for reflex low latency. I have that force to on plus boost in the driver. For the graphical settings, we're running benchmarking's optimized settings that went out earlier today, I think. If you haven't seen any of those, I would strongly recommend heading over there. Link to that will also be in the description. Things like the volumetric fog, motion blur, and whatnot have been forced off in the INI, as well as some other tweaks. Post-process quality is set to medium, just because I like how some of it looks, but I'm not looking to add the depth of field and other extraneous things. Now, if you've hung around my channel at all, you know I generally prefer frames over prettiness. That said, I think with some of these tweaks, especially removing the volumetric fog and some of the other INI changes, this actually looks like Borderlands again. Since I am running OBS and recording, that does tend to shave about 10-15 FPS off the top for me. My 1% lows when I'm not recording tend to live in the 90 to 110 range, and baseline FPS is usually in the 110, 120 range. So let's go ahead and do a quick clear of everybody's favorite farming spot. Just because there is a little bit of loading stutter that happens right there between that jump. We'll go ahead and delete him just so we can get some things happening on screen. And you can take a look at both the all input to photon latency as well as the click to photon latency. I'll pick these up later. Let's go ahead and make some changes here. We're going to do this incrementally. We're going to turn on FrameGen. Change nothing else. We're still running at native 1440p. Let's reset splash zone and go again. Hopping over here. Hello, splash zone. I missed your face, even though it's big, because I'm bad at video games. All right. So again, you can see the differences of the all input to photon latency, as well as the click to photon latency. So let's go ahead and now turn this to DLSS quality. Just because. I mean, we don't really need to, because natively I'm running anywhere between 90 and 120 FPS. But just for the sake of completeness here, respawn splash zone, and away we go. Bloop. Hello. I'm gonna attach explosives to your face. Good night. So again, you should actually see a slightly lower input latency, both in terms of all input as well as click to photon latency. Now, throughout all of this, you might notice that the frame time has stayed pretty stable and consistent. Yes, you will see some drops as you traverse zones, and there is some loading that happens. That's a UE5 thing. There's only so much you can do to counteract that. But outside of that, frame times are steady. And again, we're not making the game look like hot garbage here. Realistically, the point to this entire video is to do your own testing instead of blindly following what some talking head or big streamer on the internet says. In this case, you can see that there really isn't a meaningful impact of frame generation on your input latency. In fact, I would wager that it's several unrelated settings that are contributing. After I changed the I/O priority, did some other tweaking in process lasso, and changed some registry keys to more equitably balance foreground and background resources for I/O, my input latency dropped to whoa. And if people are going to complain about subjective mouse feel, well, maybe take a look at your entire system and not just whether or not you have frame gen on. Anyhow, if you want a more in-depth video about how to set up each of those settings beyond the in-game stuff that benchmarking talks about, I'd be happy to make a more in-depth video. Drop a comment if that's the case. Otherwise, I've been BaldSquid. I'll see y'all next time.